So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our third session of Virtual Ops 2020. After yesterday's amazing aviation women's panel, today we have another expert talk about the digital enablers for a lean and more agile airline operations. I think we should initially make an introduction of everybody, that we are knowing who else is in the call before Sapna is then taking over and is presenting. So Sapna, maybe you're starting with yourself, introducing yourself.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sapna, a consultant to the IR flight operations and crew management products of IBS. I have been lucky enough to conceptualize and build the crew management and flight operations product, but in the process was lucky enough to work with likes of British Airways and KLM and Cathay Pacific, Emirates, Etihad, and so on, a lot of airlines, and learned a lot in the process. So that's where I'm from. I joined from the UK office of IBS. It's good to have you here today.
So then let's go from London to the US, because Gary, I think for you it's pretty early at the moment, isn't it?
That is first Asia.
We can barely hear you. You have a very low voice.
I
will throw something at you, yeah?
Now it's better, yeah.
Yes, we're used to working with Asia and India. So all times of the day.
My wallet is in the car.
I'm Atlanta.
We cannot hear you, Gary. You're breaking.
Maybe you can go to someone else. I'll try a different microphone.
So let's go to Sweden. Yours for the introduction.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. Martin Hoffman is my name. I work for Scandinavian Airlines and has been that for almost 23 years. I've been in all over operations in SES, and last 10 years, mainly with crew planning and crew systems. I was responsible before for the whole crew planning of SES Scandinavia. And I also worked quite a lot in the like borderline between IT and operations, and in all different areas, with mainly for planning systems and planning for airline operations. So yes, that's me.
And Marek, good to see you from Poland. Would be great if you introduce yourself, please.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, very good.
Great. My name is Marek Sigła. I'm from LOT Polish Airlines. I'm working as a pilot, but for the last 3 years. But before that, I was working in IT for 15 years, implementing different kinds of IT systems. And currently, I'm also working on changing on project. The goal of this project is to change our OCC crew and SCAD system.
Good, then let's go to Latvia, please. Martin. And please mute yourself if you're not speaking, then we have less echo and side noises. Martin, the stage is yours. You are muted, Martin.
That's because you muted me.
Yeah, because there was some side noise. I think some wind came through the window and so on. That's why. Now you have full voice.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Really nice to meet you. My name is Martin. I'm a self-proclaimed flight operations futurist, which means I come up with crazy ideas and then people find the value in them and maybe do change something about flight operations mostly. I've been involved in flight operations for 10 years. I've been before that a mostly IT consultant for about 10 years. And I am also an airline pilot, like my colleague from LOT. We've been flying for 10 years with a regional airline in Latvia. And very happy to be here.
Then let's go to the best presenter from Agiforce Operations, Martin. I think you're currently in Germany, isn't it?
Well, currently in the Czech Republic in the home office, but anyway, good morning.
Morning.
And thank you for inviting me. Yeah, my background is the ops control / dispatch. I currently work for Lufthansa Consulting, where I focus on the on the operational excellence topics in Lufthansa and also in the airlines outside. And previously, I was working for EasyJet and Czech Airlines.
Yeah, Hartmut, currently in Zurich or Hamburg, or where are you at the moment?
In Hamburg. A very warm good morning, or very early good morning to you, Gary, I guess. Good to see some familiar faces. I'm Hartmut from IBS Software based in Zurich. I'm in Phil's team, and I'm in charge for sales activities in Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, and Africa.
So if we mention Phil, now we get back to London. You are muted. Pubs are open, sound is off. We cannot hear you. Then we give a try to Gary in the US again.
Yes, how does this sound?
That's, I would say, stereo. It's 4K quality now.
Okay, very good. This is the Apple earphones. And Hartmut, good to see you. I think the last time was in South Africa. Yes. I'm in Atlanta, and with Zulu Airline Systems. We have a scheduling and slot management system, and my interest in talking with IBS is we also are actively trying to integrate much more operations work or data into the scheduling process. So we have optimizers that make very crew friendly and maintenance friendly and on-time performance friendly schedules.
Perfect. So I think, Phil, you want to have it a second try?
I put a different microphone on. Does that work?
I think that comes from the continent, from Europe. It works, yeah.
Okay, good. It does actually. So yes, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'm calling from a rather drizzly, dull London, unfortunately, which you'll all guess is just what London's always like. But actually, last few weeks we've been having some gorgeous weather. So I'm Phil Hinton. I work at IBS. I'm responsible for all the sales of our aviation products in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Having said that, my career has had quite a lot of exposure to airline operations. I started off airline operations back in 1991 in Hong Kong when I replaced a whiteboard. Their original ops system was a whiteboard with a seated telex message machine, which we replaced with one of the very first operation control systems. During my career, I've worked for a number of companies, but been with IBS for some, I guess, 17, 18 years now. And particularly, again, in the area of operations, work very closely with a number of our clients, the likes of British Airways, Emirates, Virgin Atlantic, KLM. They're all companies where I've really got to know their operations and their operations people very well. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you very much. So the stage is yours, Sapna. And everybody from you who know the virtual happy hour format and concept, that's exactly how we also now make the Virtual Ops 2020. It's not a one-way typical webinar style of presentation where you are now getting a lot of information and you have to fight against your attention span. You are always invited to just raise your voice and ask questions. So let's make it very dynamic and agile. And we really want to foster the dialogue amongst all the panelists here. So in the earlier sessions, people use the raise hand functionality, but you can also simply speak up and then ask questions to Sapna and the other attendees while we are presenting the slides. So, stage is yours, Sapna.
Great. So today I'm very happy to be with a panel that has multiple centuries of, or centuries of airline experience here, invaluable experience. And it's also good that we have a mixed panel of representing the airline operations, actual operations side, as well as the other side, which is IT, as well as the consultant side. So we are here to hear all sides of the views. And I also feel because of that, you also might have come across or lived through multiple airline crises, and nothing so decimating as this one. And that also makes you the perfect thinkers to see opportunities in this crisis. And that's what we all are here for, to see what opportunities we can bring out of this major crisis or extended crisis and make operations a better world. And I'm also happy that there's a crazy futurist in the group because that's exactly the kind of brains that we need today. So bring out your ideas. Let's talk whatever we want to create a better future. So this is how I've organize this session. Let's first talk about what we want to achieve, what the objective of this session is about. Then let's kind of drill down into the priorities of airlines, the immediate priorities of airlines these days, and how they are using technology to solve it, and also to see what of those would sustain onto the long term to become best practices or processes that improve airline operations. So
Sapna, are you going already on the next slide, because we are still seeing just the first slide?
No, I'm still on the first slide.
Okay, then it's good.
Yeah, so that's how I'm organizing this session, where we are talking about drilling down into airline priorities, how they are meeting it at immediate priorities, and also talking about long-term priorities and what sustains. On that note, we have been talking with multiple airlines, reaching out to our customers, and this presentation is kind of a consolidation of all their views, all their how they believe they can tackle these situations better. And with each of these sessions, we gain more knowledge, more thoughts about, for example, today we get your inputs and we improve these consolidated views and move forward. So in the next few slides, you'll be able to see how we've collected that information and what comes out of it. We all know that it has been the airline industry has retraced or retracked back to the pre-2006 kind of level, isn't it? 93% RPKs, and even cargo going down to 27.7%, going down by 27.7% CTK and all that. And April has been kind of an abyss. We've been talking to our customers and partners, and our partners like LATAM and recently Aero Mexico and Avianca have filed for restructuring. Virgin Atlantic was also trying for that. Well, we know that we know what's happening at KLM. They've been retiring a lot of their 747 fleets. So we also see that around 75 million flights are being cancelled till July. So everything that comes out talks about a crisis. But things have been looking up. There has been an upshift from June. We hear TUI last week saying that, yeah, our bookings have gone up by 50%, which is great. And I love to see the Lufthansa ads where they say they are opening up to 80 European destinations and 30 destinations outside Europe. Holidaymakers making more plans, airlines saying, yeah, now we'll be able to operate at least to 45% to 60% of capacity compared to the 10% that we were down in the April periods. So things are looking up, but nevertheless, this is definitely a crisis. But yes, we truly believe that in every crisis, there is brilliant opportunities. And here we are to talk about that. And airlines do believe in that. So when when we were talking to airlines, what they were saying is, we asked them, how are you managing it? So they just say, we're just living by the day. Speed is of priority, and speed is more important than perfection, like the WHO chief says. We have created this kind of a crisp framework for talking to them, understanding what they're doing with their immediate priorities. So what they're doing is what they're thinking is how do we kind of respond to these kind of unpredictable changes in customer demand, and how do we control costs in the meantime? How do we make our resources more liquid? They also are concerned about the changing regulations that an ICAO or IATA or different countries come up with and how they catch up with that, and also to give the right communications to their passengers as well as to their staff. And in the meantime, they also say because everything is moving to remote operations and because we only have limited resources to operate with, we also have to ensure that the resources are operated productively. So productivity is also one of their major priorities. So that is response, control, cost control, ensuring safety, and ensuring resource productivity. That's 4 of the immediate concerns that they are fighting with. But they also said something very interesting. So when they are doing this day-to-day firefighting, just like we hear the theory of business process reengineering, my thoughts went back to that when I was learning that in my MBA days. So when there has to be a drastic improvement, it has to come through a jolt. And COVID is kind of a jolt that will help airlines to reset their business processes, rethink the wastages in their processes, and come out of this crisis with re-engineered processes, with that jolt that comes in. Just like human nature, some of us need a jolt to change completely, and that usually ends up in improved version of us. So with airlines translated, so like Mr. Hammer, the MIT professor, brought out in business process reengineering, it is kind of working in airlines, and they're coming out with re-engineered and agile version of themselves. And they also feel that whatever learnings they're getting from managing this crisis, and also the best practices that come out of it, be it in business processes, be it in IT practices, be it in their people and project practices, everything is filtering down, and everything will filter down towards long-term sustainable operations that'll create an airline that is resilient and more disruption proof from all the learnings that has come out of this. So this is kind of the opportunity here is that this is kind of a journey from a jolt that is a chaos to a re-engineered and leaner processed airline, and towards a long-term sustainable efficiency that makes the airline a more resilient and effective operations machine, we would say. So that's the thought that we are going to drill down into today. So that's the flow as well. What are the immediate priorities? How is it helping in the medium and short term? And how is it going to trickle down into long-term better processes and best practices? You can actually talk whenever you want. I'm happy for you to talk whenever you want and contribute, and because this is going to be a discussion. So I'll continue. You can just raise your hands or just talk in, no problem. Another thought here that goes along with that, of course, is this digital transformation possible without technology? So the technology has to be ingrained into the process of digital, or the process of the sustainable transformation or the short-term transformation. When we were talking to airlines, something interesting that came out was more than 70% of the airlines we were talking about did believe that this flow, that is the improved airline or the sustained operational practices airline, is going to happen in the future. Well, there were around 20 to 30% who still believe they are going to retract back to the old pre-COVID phases. So that's interesting. 70% is believe there's going to be an improved airline that comes out of these ashes. And of who we talked to, and this I'm taking the numbers from an FTE and Apex survey, around 63.7% believe that digitization and technology will support these transformations. But it was interesting to note that they believe that it's going to be longer term transformations that will be supported and not the shorter immediate priority ones. because a lot of airlines, even the ones we were talking to, were going back to qualitative decision making and manual processes during these COVID management times. They were shelving their digital products, and even though there might have been tools that could have helped them in this process in their existing products, they were overlooking that and going back to the age-old manual and qualitative decision making.
Martin, this goes along the line your presentation from 2 weeks ago, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. And yeah, I mean, as Sapna says, now it's too early to say, right? Because all the airlines are shocked a little bit and no one knows actually where can they afford to spend the money, but everyone understands that it's unavoidable to digitalize somehow.
Quick question, which regions of the world were surveyed with this to get these results?
Right, so the 63.7%, Martin, was an FTE survey. So they did an across the globe analysis of 900 plus airline and airport professionals. They haven't said which airlines they've done it with or airports they've done it with, but yeah, they've said it's across the globe. That's where the 73.7% comes from. Yeah, and all those, the remaining 30% crowd who does not believe the digitization would be supporting transformation. Right, so should I go on? Can I go on?
Always.
Yeah, so something interesting that came out, not interesting, we all know that the reason that a good percentage of these airlines did not believe that digitization would help is because they believe the technology tools and practices were not mature enough to manage the crisis or did not give them what they expected to manage the crisis. This could have been because of various reasons. They still trust their qualitative expertise, and we all know that during disruptions, which have been more shorter term or irregular operations, there's always a tendency to retract back to manual operations or qualitative decision making. And as Martin was saying in his presentations, could also be because of some humanitarian concerns that the OCC or the planning team is having, or it could actually be because the technology is not supportive enough and it doesn't give them what they actually need. Or we as technology partners are not communicating or giving the right messages, or we're not talking the right way to the airlines. And cybersecurity is also a rising concern, which reduces that dependence on digital tools and technology practices. But there is an agreement, however, that sustainable operational transformation will require technology more. But the message here is that only if we start adopting them in this crisis situation in the short term, only then will things improve. Only then will the best practices in technology come out and flow through easily into the long term and stay as best practices in the long term. So that's again the principles of re-engineering that we talk about. We need to start now, only then will we filter out the best to go into better practices in the future. So this is mainly what we are talking about, about the sustainable transformation evolution and how technology will be helping in the short as well as long term in the process. Any thoughts here? Any questions?
Sapna, this is Gary Bush. One question, are they feeling that the technology issue, the gap is the software or the data? That, because of all the change and the dynamic nature of the business these days.
Very interesting question. So when we talk about technology practices and digitization, yes, they also mean data. So on one side, software, on the other side, practices and processes like, for example, tools that support agility or tools that support remote operations. And also on the other side, data, which is a very interesting point you're bringing. So because of these separate disparate systems and because data is so muddled up and mixed up, not an expected consistent format across systems. They're also struggling to use data to improve operations. And that's one area that they felt there is huge potential to support decision making. If only they had centralized data across, say, MRO system, operation system, flight system, even reservation system. And if they could use that big data consolidated somewhere over the years to make the right decisions, that would have really helped them. That's a good point. Yeah.
Is there a growing trust, or is cloud security still something that some airlines realize is more secure and others are still kind of in a older mindset about the cloud that prevents them from putting their data together in a cloud database?
I think maybe I could just, sorry, Simon, just answer that, because that's another interesting question. I've certainly found, speaking to airlines over the last five to 10 years, a huge shift in attitude. I remember speaking to CIO of British Airways probably about 5 or 6 years ago, who said something like, our operational systems will never be in anywhere other than our own data centers. And that as an attitude has completely changed. British Airways themselves are implementing our system on a cloud, a public cloud, obviously, so with all the necessary security in. So I see a huge shift there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that was also part of Martin Sedlacek's presentation 2 weeks ago, that a new mindset on one hand is required, but I think more and more people understand the power of data and also the power of technology. On the other hand, it's always a question, when is a good time to do it? And interestingly, some airlines are exactly taking now the opportunity with a lower amount of aircraft up in the air to make a business transformation. So I think we will hear more and more very soon that airlines go in the cloud and deploy digital technology in order to minimize the impact of disruptions for passenger aircraft and crews, and also bring down the cost.
So
Thank you.
If I may add to that, actually this approach that we took in LOT, we wanted to take this opportunity to lower that the ops teams have the lower workload, to get the information from that needed to process with the new system, and to prepare for the implementation of the new system. So we are trying to take this opportunity. Unfortunately, now we are starting to back flying, and it's this approach is not through. We didn't use this opportunity fully.
But Marek, on the other hand, I have very bad news for you, because you will be the only airline in the world which will always have a lot of data and a lot of efforts and a lot of work to do.
Yes, we are always have a lot of everything. Yes.
And you're all right. I mean, more than business processes being integrated into IT, we are seeing airlines thinking more about their IT infrastructure, be it on cost saving or be it on productivity side. So yes, cloud movements and IT infrastructure improvements are seen more than business process improvements. That's what is coming out of our discussions.
I would like to add one general point, just to keep everybody who is like me kind of in love with technology. One truth which I always try to remember is that technology just enhances the existing situation. So if you give a bad business lots of technology, it will just make a lot more volume of bad business. And vice versa, if they already have decent processes, the technology is going to augment the efficiency or effectiveness of what they do, just as a kind of background warning. But thanks very much for all the great points raised.
But Martin, that's a very a great statement, because my experience is, and I don't count the amount of RFPs I worked on, but I count the amount of airlines I worked with. I'm at 121 now, and I would say 95% of all these airlines, when they were issuing an RFP, they were exactly looking for functionality which is covering existing processes, and it's very rare. It's very, you can count it with one hand, or the fingers of one hand, that airlines are also taking the opportunity to simplify processes, to change processes, and not to do exactly the same typewriter style of business with a computer. So that's why let's fight together for this and achieve really a new mindset, that the implementation of a new system is always an opportunity to simplify things, to automate things, and not to repeat the errors from the past.
And you're right, as we see in the following slides as well, there used to be not enough analysis or why we need some technology to support our processes thought earlier. It was more like, we had this, why don't we improve to a new system? That's it. But now because everything is going to be more cost conscious, there will be more value-based analytics about why we are doing something and why we need technology to support that. Those questions will be asked more within airlines, and we are seeing that a lot. But agree with your point, Martin. There has to be more thought into just including technologies. No, it shouldn't be a blind process. It should be a thought of process, and they should know why they're doing it. Having said that, let's drill down now into some of these crisp airline priorities, and let's see what airlines are doing there and how much of technology they are putting in to support those steps they are taking. The first and more primary one that we are seeing is obviously firefighting, responding to the variations in customer demand, ability to travel, and confidence or willingness to travel. So this is some interesting information that I was looking at from IATA and ICAO surveys. So the demand obviously was dependent on the economy and trade coming back or reviving. The ability was controlled by when the countries will lift their travel restrictions, and the confidence was dependent on the government coordinated airline safety communications. The messages that airlines give out about how safe their operations were, what government gives out about what the containment measures are going to be, and when a vaccine is going to be expected. So that determined customer confidence. That's what our airline customers were saying. And ICAO was kind of, with all these extreme uncertainties, they were kind of theorized what kind of a return graph it's going to be, and they feel it's more of, they said earlier said it's going to be more of U-shaped, now they're saying it's more of L-shaped. And there is kind of this vicious cycle, or the similarities in graph that you see between the economic revival and the aircraft capacity or the passenger demand revival. It could be one determining the other. The economic revival will definitely impact the passenger demand, and the aircrafts moving between countries will definitely impact the GDP as well. But that graph similarity was good to see.
It would be now a good question to the airline representatives here, Air Baltic, SAS, and LOT. So in which of these graphs are you currently seeing your rebound of business?
Maybe I can start. We can see that it's really a discussion on what type of what type of curve, because that's really what we're in the middle of doing right now. It's trying to decide which of these paths do we see. So, but I would say we're in the U-shape path, but we have our high hopes that we can, because we evaluate all the time which destinations to open and how that will proceed. So I would say it depends a little bit on what's the demand, because the demand shifts so fast. So we have seen that's and it's a strange market because it's so dependable on which countries that opens up, and especially on the long haul routes. That's still something we really struggle with to see how to open up, especially for the US market and also for Asia. So I don't have a clear answer, but I can fully understand the different types of curves here, but I can't really say where we are because it changes all the time, I would say.
And it's also always influenced from the capability of the strongest competitor in the local market. So I think that's also one aspect which makes it very difficult to compare the situation, because if you have a local competitor who is maybe not capable to really kick off his business, I would expect that you have a stronger demand, whereas if two competitors in a competitive market have to compete on the same demand, then of course they are somehow biting each other's piece of the cake.
Daniel, I could maybe make a comment from the perspective we've seen. Some countries have handled the crisis quite well, and other countries are seeing a definite W, where they thought they were coming out of the first wave and they're actually bouncing. The US being one of them, Australia having some issues, South Africa. So I'm wondering, Sapna, are you hearing anything more about a W?
It seems like the returns or the bounce backs, airlines are viewing that as more local impacts, more than a full country kind of impact. So be it the Leicester case in the UK or the Victoria case in Australia, it's more like little spurts coming in small regions, which might not impact the entire country travel as it was before the June-July period. So this is basically ICAO theories, but I totally get where you're coming from. There is a fear it could be a W kind of pattern, everything goes back to where it was and we have to retrace back. But more of the theories coming out in the L-shaped, a slower bounce back.
On average.
This maybe it's regional issues, but it may lead governments to close the country again. Just to make sure that it will not spread outside of these regions.
Okay.
Can I, again, a more general point? I remember seeing a graph like this for something completely different about 3 years ago. And the comment from the analyst was, if you look at predictions for the price of oil, nobody has a clue which way it's going. from all the the different shapes of the lines. In my region, I'm guessing it's L-shaped more than anything else. One thing which is for sure, which I guess we all agree on, it's going up, but it's definitely not going back to baseline before mid next year.
That's an interesting point, Martin, because some surveys were saying that around 40% people believe it's going to take 2 years, around 50% believing it's going to bounce back in 2 years, and 40% believing in 3-year returns. But yeah, there is a feel, isn't it, that it might bounce back earlier by mid of next year. And
Sapna, will that be different for the different segments? It seems tourists are bouncing back, if you will, but business travelers are very hesitant.
True. Yeah.
And part of it may be things like Teams and other online meeting capabilities that are working against that. They're finding it quite convenient and less expensive for businesses.
Exactly.
Yeah, but on the other hand, that's exactly now what I'm closely following up here in Germany, because we are now starting to travel abroad to different international countries. On the other hand, now we are hearing at the news there are some infections here and there, so that's then also something which might influence even this leisure travel, if maybe some leisure travelers are suddenly also emitting some local infections in certain countries. So that's why I think maybe in 3 to 6 months we will have a much better confidence where is really this trend going also for the leisure travel.
Yes, but there'll be a spurt in leisure travel, I guess, in the next few months, as long as Greece or Spain is continuing to reopen. As I was mentioning earlier, TUI and lastminute.com was saying, lastminute.com was saying actually there was 80% increase in leisure travel bookings that's coming in the last 2 weeks, which shows that kind of a spurt. And there's also an analysis that found that 70% business travelers now question 70% of the time about the essentiality of their travel. Do they really need to travel, or probably they're acclimatizing to tools like Teams and Zoom and other things? Yeah. In fact, we are having effective meetings through Teams and Zoom these days, and we are questioning: do we need to travel so much? Yeah, but that's my point of view.
I think it's about the confidence. So the confidence of people wanting to travel if they're feeling safe. For me, I think the insurance companies and the airlines themselves have got a job to do here, because certainly the younger generation, I can speak on behalf of my kids who are all sort of young adults, they would be very keen to travel, but what they don't want to do is to pay out money on tickets and hotels to then find, because of a local lockdown or because of sudden government travel restrictions, means that they lose their money. So I think if insurance companies, I think, have started off saying no COVID cover, they're now starting to give COVID cover for illness if you're ill while abroad, but also for cancelled holidays. So if you were suddenly told through a track and trace to self-isolate, and that meant you couldn't then go on your trip, that you're not suddenly going to lose money. So I think that would really help push the demand back as well.
And you can see this interesting customer booking patterns here. Around 61% of booking is happening 0 to 3 days before the travel days, whereas it used to be just 40% earlier. And IATA even says that for winter 2020, typically, by now, there should have been some amount of bookings in 2019, but then now it's 59% lesser. So the booking pattern seems to be shifting closer towards the day, to be sure that it's not going to be cancelled. I'm not going to be ending up with vouchers that might not get to work. And as a result, OAG was also saying that what we schedule versus what we actually fly, the gap is 50% now, which also shows that shift in customer demand. And as Martin was saying earlier, everything is shifting towards the last date. And interesting things that were coming out of that is American Airlines recently, when we were having a conversation, was saying when it started, we took more than half a month to actually adjust to these kind of customer demand fluctuations. But right now they've achieved a rhythm. And I don't know how they're doing it, but they said it's just 5 days that we're now taking since May to respond to customer demand. So they've achieved a kind of rhythm to this changing, fluctuating patterns. And they're also kind of questioning, are these frozen, rigid planning cycles really going to last? Or are we going to go into a continuously improving kind of planning processes? Will the manpower plans or the slot plans keep changing and till the more last moment? Because they seem to be sure that this kind of closer to the day bookings would carry on for at least the next 1 year. So they have to kind of, it's not a short disruption mode, it's going to be a longer term pattern. So should they re-question and reset their longer term plans to a shorter term, continuously improving plan that takes information from everywhere and is able to dynamically adjust to the situation, be it manpower, be it slots, be it schedules.
That's an interesting point, because we were also hearing from some airlines that they're also not planning monthly rosters anymore, that they are now planning on a 3 days basis in order to cope with the steady changes. Martin from SAS, if you have now this kickoff of the business and you have these short-term bookings, how much is it then impacting also the tail assignment process, the planning, which aircraft to take for which flight according the load factor?
Yes, that's definitely something we struggle quite a lot with, to find the right size of aircraft, and just given the demand, and especially as I mentioned before, that we can see, for example, we had a number of flights booked for Greece from Stockholm, but then the Greece borders were closed for Sweden, and then we ended up with having a lot of passengers that we didn't know how to, and we needed to rebook it, and also find different ways to do it and cancel the flight. So that's something we struggle with every day, I would say, and also trying to use the right capacity and the right size of aircraft for all the, because basically we have lease partners and our own or SK aircraft with both 737s and Airbus 320, and also in different sizes. So that's really what we're trying to plan for, and we also have done this short-term planning process. Maybe I shouldn't go into too much detail, but that's instead of going on a monthly process, we're down to a weekly process now, where we also have exemptions from our CBAs, and we have tried to do this so everything can be changed within 1 or 2 weeks. The traffic program has a 2-week process. So 2 weeks prior to when we release the traffic program, or it's 2 weeks before the actual flight, we release the traffic program, and then also we have the crew planning process in only 1 week, which is totally different from before. And so we learned a lot in this process, but in that process also we try to change the size and get the right sizing of aircraft as one part of this. But unfortunately, and that could come back to the previous discussion with the IT tools. We've seen that that's really one of the big things that we can see, that our IT tools and systems aren't really prepared to have this short-term process. So that's one of the key learnings here as well, that we need to be more agile. And I think that's the key learning from this, is that how do we transfer both the organization and the IT systems to be more agile and more because this is nothing that's going to end just in a few weeks. This is something we plan to do for the rest of this year, I would say. I hope that answers the question. Yes.
Absolutely, because it's somehow, I think, it's a kind of cleansing crisis, and as Sapna rightly said earlier, every crisis is also an opportunity, because I think with the old school kind of planning, this monthly roster, some airlines do 2 weekly roster. You have a lot of changes in the past. I think with a more short-term planning, where of course you need the technology support, and the good news for you, Martin, is there are companies out there who provide solutions for that. I think that will be maybe dismantle the amount of changes over time. So, and that will be interesting to see then in the hindsight, maybe in a year's time or 2 years' time, how this change of planning, short-term planning, and also the flexibility suddenly from the pilots and the cabin crews agreeing on these new rules, that airlines are suddenly having a more agile approach in planning and execution.
I would also ask the airlines, like Sapna nicely said at the beginning, at the moment it's speed over the perfection, right? But at some point, especially as everyone is entering those cost-cutting programs, I'm afraid that those short-term adjustments at the moment with current rules, current processes, technology are not the most efficient. So is someone already starting to question efficiency of that, or is it still too early? That would be first question. And the second question regarding the demand bounce back, when you are changing the things, and again, I was happy to hear that the airlines are now more and more questioning what do they want to achieve. But in terms of size, there used to be a mindset that you needed completely different solution if you have 100 aircraft and 200 aircraft. And at the moment, you don't really know when and how big you will be. So how are you thinking about this? And do you see any development in this area, or is it just waiting?
Yeah, I can start to answer. I would say that even from the beginning of this crisis, we have the focus on cost, and just for your understanding, we're based in 3 different countries with different types of furlough regulations, and so it's really been a struggle to find the right sizing of to keep the cost down, and so that's really been one of the key goals. And also then we're also letting around 40% of our co-workers or we're laying off about 40% in total in SES. So it's a balance how to keep the cost down and at the same time to try to start open up the operation. So that's really something that we've been discussing from day one, just to manage this and doing the ramp up as effective as possible also. So that's been our key focus area, but of course it's been really complicated to do that in a good way, and we have done mistakes, of course, and it's been not maybe the most optimal, but I think it would be given the circumstances we've done quite a fairly good job, I would say. But and again, we didn't, our IT tools and systems were not really prepared for this type of situation, and that's also an area where we really can see that we weren't not prepared for this type of crisis. And yeah.
And that's interesting, because that's what a lot of airlines are also saying. And this is the when we have asked about how they see digitization enabling faster response. As we were mentioning earlier, airlines were saying that in the short term, they don't find that they have the right tools to respond fast to this crisis. And we also asked what type of activities they are doing, and how much of digitization they are doing in those activities. So I've put this table here based on some of the conversations we were having, and it's kind of sorted by the time share of activities they are doing to be better responsive to the situation. On the top, the most time-consuming activities. And they've also said what they see that activity as. Do they see that as a long-term efficiency improvement activity that seeps onto the long-term sustainable operational efficiency bit, or is it just going to be an intermittent requirement or a short-term requirement? Intermittent is repeating, a frequent repeating of the activity, or short-term is only during the COVID management phase. And that's what you see in the need classification. And tech enabling is their view about how much it's either how much they have tech enabled that area, or how much it could also be that they have the tools and they don't think they are good enough for using, or they have the tools, they're really firefighting, they are not using the good features in the tools, because right now they have gone back to the age-old firefighting qualitative expertise mode. So it could be anything that tech enabling story says there. So airlines mainly seem to be, for instance, one of our customers in US was saying that when this started, like when, for example, Sydney had a 14-day quarantine restriction with mainland China, that were the first type of travel restrictions that were coming up for their crew members. So that required a whole lot of changing of routes away from mainland China, a whole lot of travel restriction, tracking new travel rules coming in. So that phase, they were saying around 10 days of their month was actually going in. So they had this crew control team and the crew planning team. The crew control team handed over the rosters back to the crew planning team. They didn't use tools. they just sat there and manually had to rework on all the routes. Well, the crew control reworked on the routes, but the crew planners were trying to see, how am I going to ensure this is fatigue insured? How am I going to ensure that the FTA rules of crew members are met? How am I going to at least try to bring the remaining days back to an optimal, cost-saving plan? So 10 days to, or in some cases, 15 days lost in that process. So the question comes, why not just use some tools or re-optimization tool or a better recovery tool there? Those questions kind of come to our mind. So ad hoc replanning and bulk operations changes were taking the maximum time, and they were not using tools there or felt that tools were not sufficient there. So nil or minimal use of tools. Fast disruption recovery, interesting that, again, the technology enabling was lower there. There was also the high usage of contactless communication that was required. So Daniel, you had shared news about the Aer Lingus pilots raising 360,000 euros for because they had a very good idea on improvement of communication, collaboration, a frequency kind of project that they had come up with. So that show, and they were able to prove to their VCs that they are able to improve costs or reduce costs by bringing in communication and collaboration more into this operation process, improving the communication between the stakeholders, between departments, for pilots, etc., and reduce the cost of the airline. So that shows there is a lot of potential in the communication and integration between system scope as well. That's a case in point there. And also, as everybody was saying, a lot of fleet restructuring and crew restructuring was happening to respond to these kind of changes. Hubs being closed, consolidation of operations, the Sun Express closing their German hub. So many things were being heard, and crew being retrained to go to a different fleet. Like the Elal was saying, the 747 pilots were retrained to become Dreamliner pilots. So everything was so dynamically happening, and the structure of crew organization and the aircrafts that are being used, they were turning more to narrow body to go to or match the PAX demand or the capacity rate that's 40 to 60% nowadays. That was also happening. And another major thing that they were doing is, of course, all of the repurposing to cargo, be it a Cathay, be it a Virgin Atlantic, British Airways, everybody is catching up to repurposing operations, but all the challenges that come with it, like crew complement challenges or crew FTL challenges, crew fatigue challenges. So that was also taking a lot of time. And along with this came the need to change the FTA rules. So we are working with some of our current customers to, for example, change the FTA rules, enable some waivers and operational requirements, like the qualification end date being, or the frequency being extended, or the operational requirements, aircraft being a bit softer than it used to be. So these are the areas that airlines, our partners were working on majorly, the time they took for it, how they see it moving to the long term, and how much they felt technology was sufficient in these areas. And it was interesting that what came out of this is they were kind of, what kind of technology? We asked them, what do you really want? How do you think technology would have helped you in these operations? So they really believed, they thought well, they were thinking outside this crisis. And what they were saying is, systems that are integrated, that is, have from a slot management to crew operations to flight planning, a single integrated system which dynamically responds to these kind of changes happening in one place. That's something that really helped them, so they don't have to depend on all the complex interfaces that they have in their landscape. Quickly, a change in one place reflects on the other. That's something that they really wanted at this time. And systems that dynamically adapt to these kind of volume changes and structure changes, so they don't have to go back to manual processes. They don't have to check the rules manually. One of our customers is actually checking the country travel restriction rules, that's the 14-day quarantine rules and things like that, manually, because they were unable to change it on their system. And they were also, of course, as we talked earlier, flexible and continuously improving replanning tools. We no longer might want the 6 monthly plans or 3, or the even the crew plans that happen 1 month. We might, for some time at least, need, like an airline India was saying, weekly plans or 2-day plans. But unfortunately, they've kept all their digital tools in the fridge, as they were saying, because they were doing it manually, because the digital tools were not able to flexibly replan every 2 days or flexibly replan every week. And definitely, as a point that came up earlier, data, centralized data across systems would definitely help them to make better decisions, and that combined with good alerts alerts in the system, or management by exception in the system, will definitely help them. So these were some of the desires that were coming out of airlines. Easy configurability, high-performing integrated systems, dynamically adapting, flexible replanning and re-optimization, centralization support. And they also saw a future of IoT coming in here, for example, to enable faster turnaround process, to have flexible turnaround processes instead of a fixed turnaround practice. It has to be responding to delays, adjusting itself to delays, get the right sense of what's happening when. So that's where they saw the IoT coming in. So these are some of the desires that airlines had raised to improve their responsiveness over this extended crisis period and even further. What do you think? And do you think something else would come in? And some of these may not be relevant.
I have a question. It's a little bit related to what we discussed last time. And I'm the last one who will say the systems of the IT providers are perfect. I've worked with them for too long to say that. But on the other hand, do you see now with the airlines, I sometimes feel like the miracle is expected. And as you said, many people don't even know how the systems exactly work or how they should be set up. And now they say, we want everything differently. But for that, as we discussed last time, you probably need a bigger back office at the moment, or over the long term, the people who will really work on making your systems adjustable on the go. Do you see airlines thinking in this direction, or is it more this wish, like, give me a system with one magic button which will resolve any crisis which might come?
Definitely not. So one of the points that was coming out is we don't want systems with a magic button. We want systems that enable our people, because to be frank, there's so much qualitativeness in customization in each of these problems that depending on a single red button would be really risky. So it has to be what they wanted was not red button. What they wanted was decision support tools that enable their people to make the right decisions. So they did, and it also links back to the point that we discussed last time, Martin, about data-enabled OCC people. I mean, probably the OCC or the planners would now be more skilled in understanding or using data-related tools to make their decisions better. So it's not like systems replacing OCC. It's more like OCC or planning team being more used to digital tools and data related practices, as Barry was saying earlier, to make better decisions. So yes, that's the line that airlines are going to. They're not definitely thinking about reducing or replacing expertise.
But in terms of like who is maintaining the systems, are they kind of taking control, or are they relying on you as the providers that you will tell them actually what's the best? Interesting
point. Okay, so That's two-pronged. They want high level of configurability. They really don't want much of vendor reliance, supplier reliance. For example, they don't want to come back to us every time they want a contact tracing report to be taken out or a rule to be changed. They want to do it themselves, so they don't want us or the IT partners interfering in that area. But there is more dependency they see, but that's in the long-term future, where they'll be re-engineering their business processes, and that's what's coming out. So when they try to make their processes leaner, like for example, if they ask questions about why don't we avoid the pairing creation process, or why don't we, for example, improve our manpower plan, or why don't we improve the scheduling plan with inputs from pairing, or why don't we improve it with more tail assignment inputs? Those kind of rethinking and resetting of business processes, they believe that at the early stages, they have to work closer with IT partners and come up with a digitized, improved business process there. But in day-to-day activities, in recovery, re-optimizations, and in database decisions, the changing of rules, configurability to scalability to operations, they really don't want to go back every time to vendors much. And they are also going towards kind of a remote interaction with, preferring more of a remote interaction with vendors there, and a more agile mode of working, which we'll come to in further slides.
Martin, also to add to your question, I think that's why I liked your presentation so much about this new mindset, because that's exactly the key. For me, digitization is not about technology, it's about the human being, and the human being needs to trust the technology, not seeing the technology as a threat and more as an enabler for better decision-making, quicker decision-making, less errors. And the good news is there are more than 20 airlines in the world who have exactly done an initiative and are implementing a digital system which is enabling users to go exactly this path. And it's a joint exercise. It has also to do with change management, because as I said earlier, if you are taking your old process and you put it in a new digital platform, you are digitizing an old school process, and you're not benefiting from the capabilities of digitization and automation. On the other hand, it doesn't make sense to automate without the support and also the understanding of the user, what's going on. I think we have some samples in the industry where automation exactly in the cockpit is leading to disaster. So that's why you have to put the user in the center. The user has to understand the capabilities of a digital system, and then if he has the trust, he let really the technology help him, but always with the possibility to interfere. So we have pilots here in the panel, and I think that's exactly what they are doing. So we just need to bring to the ground what's going on up in the air, because if you are going in the cockpit, I think Martin and Marek, they can confirm this. It's all technology driven, but a pilot needs to understand what's going on. And if the technology is doing something which is not right, then they take over and they release the autopilot button. I think that's what is now coming also to the OCC. I bet you don't believe me, Martin, isn't it?
I do. No, it was more like going in the direction. I mean, I'm fully aligned with you, and I share the opinion. It was more in the direction. We humans are also masters of the workarounds, right? And if you give them a highly configurable, complicated system, in the end, I, as an airline, wouldn't also want the provider to be too dependent on the provider, but I would need at least some feedback from the provider. Am I using it right? Because probably after a year of various people in various departments configuring it through those workarounds, you will end up in suboptimal performance of the system. And that was my question, how to deal with this.
Yeah, Martin, that's something we've heard quite a bit as well. And I think the traditional view was people would get trained and then kind of be on their own. And we're finding that users actually like to have an expert who's had experience in their area, who's accessible 24/7, either by text chat or through video meeting. And you know, over time, there's a need to put a lot of that into a knowledge base so that it's easily searchable. How do I do this? How do I do that? But when you start thinking about how do I restructure a process, they want another expert to collaborate with and help them really learn how to redesign their process as well as get the most out of the software. So that type of service is I think is essential in these dynamic times as better software.
If I can add kind of 3 points to that. Sorry if you're Gerald, if you are finished. For an airline pilot, the operating environment is highly structured and regulated. And so the autopilot is also a very deterministic system, which helps to work longer hours and get stuff done more precisely. So it's a little bit of a misleading comparison with an OCC. That brings me to the second point. On the table, which we saw there, it's very clear, I think, especially ops crews, they aim to implement technology to the low-hanging fruit. So something like contactless communication, it's nothing new, and it's just easier to do now because there's less communication, and also kind of this feeling like what we're discussing here, we're in a new normal, so might as well finally get rid of physical signatures, for example. And then you can gain the trust of the organization, I think, if you do simple experiments like that, which are successful. But one other thing about a crisis is that you have to execute. Your first point is survival, first priority, sorry, survival and preserving cash. And you don't have much time to create a complex business case about new system with fleet and crew restructuring, for example. You go back to the process which works because you don't have time to step back also for too long. For second of all, you don't even have that many people to help you step back, which brings me to the third point, and that is a question to everybody from IBS. What do you think is the proactive role of the supplier to tell the airline, hey, listen, we have some great ideas, let's bounce them around for about half hour by video, for example? And have you found that your clients then ask for more of those, or tell you to go away because right now they're really busy, as I mentioned, with survival?
I think maybe I can sort of answer that from the IBS perspective. We very much see ourselves as communities. So just like this community that Daniel's sort of set up here, we've had sessions with our customers, not just in the area of ops, but in other areas as well, where we work, just to share best practice ideas. You know, what are the challenges that people have had? Sometimes there is a learning, you know, as one of the themes that's coming through here is that everyone's used to this monthly process and you know, just sort of rolls and rolls. And so we found that some airlines have got better knowledge of how to use the system than others. So I think it's 100% absolutely on a company like ourselves to help and guide our clients through these types of situations. And you know, you can have annual user group meetings, but you know, this is where those types of communities really come into play. I
can add from the COVID-19 situation, because what Phil rightly said, that community and so on. One of the most positive aspects of this COVID-19 is that we can now virtually meet every day. So if I wanted to have such a meeting in person, probably everybody from you would be very busy in this different country and we wouldn't agree on a hotel and so on. And that's one of the positive aspects of COVID-19, that we could really get in touch with so many people from the industry and exchange information and also learn from each other. I think that's the biggest bottlenecks I see in the industry, and I'm only 25 years in travel and transportation, but I see a huge know-how jam. People don't know what is available in terms of technology. People don't know best practice from certain countries. And while talking with airlines all over the world, I think we have now established a new brain pool where we can now make use to help each other and not repeat mistakes somebody did there and there in order to really progress the industry. So that's why on one hand, I love to travel, and I hope we will all travel, because at the end, the airlines are benefiting from it. But I hope that we are also keeping the momentum with all these virtual meetings. And please do me a favor and spread the word about this community, because I like that really everybody from this industry is benefiting from it, and would be good if you are also finding other colleagues from your airlines or from the competition, because I think we need each other and we need to support each other.
And Martin, one of the things I'm finding day to day in this, because it was an interesting question you asked, when we, there are two aspects I'm finding here when interacting with customers. One is, for example, when they're repurposing to, let me take a simple example here, repurposing to cargo. For instance, one of the important things that they want to check there is my crew, for example, if my crew FTL rules configurable to convert my existing crew members to cargo operations. So what do they want there? It's just a simple little option to change their FTL rules to be flexible to cargo operations. So even though we say these in huge terms as a configurability to fleet and crew restructuring, it would actually be just using maybe an existing feature that they have, which they have forgotten or forgotten how to use, or maybe a little small tool that we give to enable flexibility to convert the FTL to cargo repurposing. It must be just a little small field that adds that much bigger value to them. So another example could be, the fleet and crew restructuring, which might just mean an easy provision. For example, when we were talking to KLM, they were retiring their 747 fleets and trying to bring their 747, they didn't want to let go of their 747 crew. They wanted to retrain them and bring them to a different fleet. So the simple tool that must be given there might not be a full-fledged, big, complex application. It's a little small 3 fields that might have to be given there that adds that big value there to enable them to, convert the crew, a simple button that converts their postings or converts their training assignments and allows them to retrain in the new aircraft type. So even though we use the big flashy terms, it might be a simple answer or simple tool or a reminder of reusing an existing tool that they have that brings out so many advantages and flexibility during these times. So I feel that there might be a rejection of big features like an IoT. So we are kind of combining two things here, short-term and long-term. So we might not be successful, like, come on, convert to IoT at this stage, maybe rejected, but then a simple flexibility to a simple rule to add a country restriction there, or reminding, hey, why don't you use this rule and why don't you, just put in China and Sydney there and there it goes, it works. You don't have to sit 14 days in a month and check whether your crew quarantine requirements are met. So we have done and are doing all that. So there, it's total acceptance and they like working with us there. But yeah, probably in IoT kind of things or feedback loop creation kind of thing, those are big changes where we might face a bit of delay in response.
Just from the housekeeping, we have 13 minutes left from the original plan before Sapna is starting in a Malayalam speed style of English. Is the audience fine that we are adding 10 minutes, or do you all have a hard stop?
For
Good.
me, it will be hard stop.
Okay. But the good news is we are recording it, so Marek, you will be capable to digest what is missing if you drop off. So then, Sapna, you don't have 2 hours now. You have additional 10 or 15 minutes, just to let the other know that, because I think we still have 3 slides. So.
No more. Okay, so the next priority, I'm not going into details because what airlines are facing, you know more than me, because capacity is responding to passenger and revenue falls. I'll just point out interesting things that comes out of this information. So there are a lot of cons of being able to control costs and improving liquidity and liquidating their capital intensive resources. But then the positive that comes out of it is airlines do see that operational efficiency would surge. So as we were discussing earlier, Martin, about thoughts that airlines are putting into investing in IT, or it would be a very cost-based or value-based analytics that they do before they take a decision. So better things come out of that. Also, resources will be closely monitored, like efficiency of aircraft, for instance. They'll be closely monitored, thus bringing in better practices and more efficiency towards when we, towards the phase that we come out of COVID. So that's the positive aspect of cost control that's coming out, higher efficient aircrafts and IT practices. That's the positive that was coming out of that. And what were airlines doing? Of course, aircrafts being grounded or terminated, hubs being closed, a lot of large resource intensive capital being liquidated, and they have started actually evaluating their decisions and evaluating their IT plans and strategies and their cloud infrastructure balancing out. So more of changes here are obviously seen in rethinking IT strategies, shelving low criticality projects, at the same time working out very flexible contracts with IT suppliers like us. And also a huge movement into cloud. That's one of the things that we saw earlier. Rethinking legacy systems and going onwards to more modern systems. But that's again not the short term, but they are really looking at, they've got the pinch of the legacy systems these days, the lack of configurability for travel rules and the lack of integration between systems. So they were different systems that very tough to talk to each other, hence not creating that dynamicity. So those thoughts are actually coming out of this. And some of the interesting desirable features they were looking at here is, can we have more cost-based decisions, more cost-based recovery tools? So introduce cost conditions and efficiency conditions more into our decision making and more into analytics and more into choosing, even if signing a new contract with a vendor, more cost-based, cost-conscious decisions were happening there. And this is the start where airlines were starting to talk about agile practices. So one of our customers in UK was saying that in 2009 they'd started thinking about agile practices because that was a clear source of revenue from projects that come in earlier. So a good point was mentioned earlier: early wins, quick wins. Ability to show to their management that they are able to bring value and cost benefits out of their operational projects in every 6 months, rather than the 3-year or 2-year cycles of project implementations. That's also one of the clear trends that was coming out of this: faster projects and flexible value-based projects and cost-based analytics. Those were coming out from the digital enablers here. Please stop me whenever you want to and whatever, if you have any questions.
We cannot stop you. You are unstoppable.
I'm unstoppable. The third area where airlines were saying, but not the least, it was really important for them. There were 2 aspects here that we were talking about. They need to instill their customers' confidence to travel. So they had to give out messages and communications that gave a safe travel experience confidence. And on the other side, organizations like ICAO and IATA and EASA were bringing out changes to regulations to respond to how countries operations were impacted by the pandemic very often. So they found, and they also were saying that these changes in regulations are opening and peaking, and everything were disoriented, and countries were taking localized containment measures, which made it difficult. So the regulations that they had to stick on to different for countries, different for airports, and they were struggling in the initial stages to catch up with what's changing where, what regulations are changing. Some were mandatory, while others were kind of up to the airline to make a differentiator, like United saying we are going to leave middle seats empty, or an Emirates coming out and saying we are going to do thermal sensing, we're going to have PP for all our crew members. So those kind of communications are keeping on going out, and it's actually becoming a more also safety, of course, and differentiator to attract customers these days. So that's what's coming out, what's happening in the safe operations part. And what are they doing there? The highest time is spent in implementing these procedures and changes, country restrictions, and incorporating that into operations. Next would be communicating to their staff, as well as training them in new ad hoc procedures, how to use HEPA filters within aircraft, how to restrict yourselves to work locations in flight. Those kind of trainings need to be given, and those trainings had to be socially distanced. They had to manage their training facilities even for that. Contact tracing and quarantines, even though a short-term requirement was something that airlines thought would have really helped, because right now we know some of our airlines are manually sitting and doing 10 steps to bring out crew members who have contacted each other, one who had been quarantined, the other not, or who had been in touch with passengers who were affected, those kind of things. So they were spending a lot of time in contact tracing and identify the right people to quarantine. So quick tools there would really have helped, but unfortunately they feel there's minimal impact there. And amidst all this, ensuring that the operational safety requirements and operational requirements of aircrafts and crew are met. An interesting area that was coming up is airlines were thinking about contactless processes more. How do we make a staff check-in, of course passenger check-in, but because we're talking operations, staff check-in and briefing operations, contactless. How can we make our work allocation processes? So the point that the staff steps into the airport to the point they leave, how can we make all those processes contactless? And these are processes that could even stay on into the long term and be able to improve the safety operation practices. They would be embedded into the SOPs of airlines, most probably, these contactless practices and self-service mobile applications. So important things that were coming out of there was they did see little self-service mobile applications on the staff side being catching on, and of course, this is when they really wanted peaks of configurability in their travel restriction rules and their fatigue rules or their operational requirement rules. So that's where customers were talking to us to a great extent. Flexible reporting practices. So they wanted so many different types of reports that showed crew travel history or staff connection practices, connection history, how they can improve their, how was the turnaround history, how is the cleansing things going on, turnaround data that were available, but they were unable to bring out from system because they were not using those features and not remembering those features, or had to depend on the vendor to bring out new reports. So flexi reporting was clearly coming out of here. And this one point, they were trying to minimize vendor dependence in this. So we had to go and meet them and refresh them on features and help them with using those features to improve their speed of operations. Any questions here?
Yeah, Marek, I think you are only 3 minutes in this call. Do you have a last question before you're dropping off? Because I think you had a hard stop.
No question for now from my side. So, thanks.
But thank you for attending, and if you have smart, positive, upbeat and enthusiastic colleagues, just let us know and we include them in our participant list.
I will. Thank you very much for having me here. Okay, and looking forward for that next invitation. Okay. Thank you.
Sapna, it's now 28. It was scheduled to 30.
Great.
So how many minutes you believe you need for the remaining slides? Because I think that's also something we can also schedule a follow-up session, because it's really a treasure of information and a treasure of insights from the global industry. And on the other hand, we don't want to just rush over. That's not something.
Let's talk about probably productivity, because we are still on the what's happening. We are still on the airline priorities and the short and medium term views of airlines. Probably we could have meet again and talk about what will be the best practices that filter down into the long term, and understand airlines' views about that in the next session. We don't want to go into the sustained efficiency and the sustained digital normal part today, probably. So talking about productivity, interesting things that have been coming out there is airlines have been spending more than, so when we talk productivity, what airlines were talking about is ensuring they have limited resource now because of the cost control measures. And with those limited resource, be it aircrafts, be it the crew members, be it the other ground staff or the office staff, the productivity of everybody. So how are they able to ensure productive operations with the limited resources? That's one of the challenges that they were facing, and that was worsened because staff operations were moving to a flexi shift kind of approach. Only around 10 to 30% staff with some of our customers, but it might be different with you. Some of our customers, 10 to 30% were coming to office. The others were working from home on the crew control and the ops control side of things. And ensuring that, so that is one of the primary areas where their time share was going, ensuring with these limitations, how are we going to efficiently utilize resources? Around 50% of their time were going in that. There was also this fear of remote operations, or the challenges of managing remote operations, like technical challenges, cybersecurity challenges, availability of system challenges. That was occupying time. And of course, because of the large number of employee contract changes and the layoffs that are being seen, employee satisfaction and engagement was one of the areas that they were spending time on. And reskilling employees to transfer to different roles, so be crew members or staff. There was a large amount of reshift and agile transformations happening, so that required reskilling and in some cases retaining skills where during furlough periods, which was also a challenge. Two major things that airlines saw coming out of this is the early win projects, or agile transformation, and remote workforce effectiveness. These were the two major things that were coming out of this. And in the longer term, they were also seeing this going on to, this is the area that will go on to rethinking of business processes and integrating technology into business process rethinking. This is where the reset of business processes will happen, is what airlines were thinking. And yeah.
Can I just, if I may?
Definitely.
I think for a lot of airlines, remote work was just a no-go till recently, and then all of a sudden, in the interest of safety, their top priority, they had to implement it. And like you said, that means now they can rethink their processes, but it also means nobody who was sent to work remotely had any training or any experience in that. And on top of having to manage, a global pandemic and how it affects each person individually, for example, having children do homeschooling, the airlines had to figure out how to support their people best. For example, having daily one-on-one short catch-ups with managers, The employee had the right to demand those instead of in the old days when they could just pop into somebody's office. I think that is a big background shift.
Yeah.
But talking with people from the industry, interestingly, they like the very high productivity suddenly available with their workforce, because everybody is reachable, of course, still with the constraints of taking care of children, sustaining the household, and maybe also with an suboptimal environment, because not everybody has the environment to really have an ergonomic workplace at home. But on the other hand, I think getting used to it, some managers were really cherishing the very high productivity of making calls at any time, and also having the time saving of not commuting anymore. So I think that's something which is also a big opportunity for airlines in the future, and maybe also create a new work-life balance, being more productive, but on the other hand also, especially for women, empower them that they are having more time also for the other tasks they are covering.
So that's a good thought to take back. Yes, and that's where the engagement aspect comes in. This was mentioned by some airlines, and how do we keep employees motivated and engaged, so that if they are on furloughs, they come back motivated and let us operate effectively. Yeah, so they're continuously bringing out provisions of engaging crew members better in these situations and helping them out. Sorry, not only crew members, staff.
Are you finding that some of the remote working is helping to break down the departmental silos that you mentioned?
Yeah, yes, yes, so that's a very good point. Yes, that was something that was coming out of meetings, because when people go and work alone on their desks, so when it was something interesting that I was saying. So one of the airlines was talking to, when they are directly physically meeting each other, there is more of a clan group mentality. So I'm talking this in two levels. One is on the physical level, as second is on the system or the IT level. On the physical level, there was more of a grouping mentality when there was more physical interactions, and people could actually talk within their group. So the OCC would people would talk to each other and kind of get information. But when they were moving back to remote, there was more dependence because there is an initial inertia to use tools to communicate through video conferencing and phone calls. So they are having to depend and lean back into data. So when they lean back into data, they're finding that data is insufficient to support their decisions. And hence they're seeing that, why don't I have this data? Why is this data like this? So why not get it from that place? So that's kind of supporting the IT transformations. So kind of breaking down silos between departments to integrate data between them and bring data more centralized. Another important thing about breaking silos there is airlines are going to, so for example, American Airlines, they're going more into cross-functional as well as intergroup functional teams. So these agile cross-functional teams are actually really helping in breaking down silos between departments. They question why don't you communicate this information? Why don't we have this data standardized here? So a lot of questions are coming up when that agile transformation is happening. Coming out of the quick win, early value philosophy.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this is kind of my last slide. So you see, I didn't mention this earlier, but the bluer highlights there, if you can see in the table, is where airlines feel there would be more, there's higher scope of digitization. So in some cases, you can even see that in the intermittent requirements or intermittent needs, they feel if there was higher digitization, they would have saved efficiency or money. Yeah, so to enable productivity, of course, we've already talked of most of things, but some important things that come out of there is the agile workforce transformation, and also looking out for vendors who are mature agile practitioners. So an agile transforming company would prefer to work with an agile practitioner on the IT vendor side as well, or agile consultant side as well. So that's a trend that we're seeing. There's more of questioning about how agile are you, how mature are you in that area, how are you able to deliver value to us every 6 months, not in every 2 years. So that's a major shift of principle that we are seeing. And of course, the re-engineering and business process and breaking silos is a longer-term thing that's actually coming out as a impact of remote working as well as the agile workforce transformation. So one of our partners in Europe, Air France-KLM Group, who started the agile transformation earlier on, was saying that their efficiency as well as their employee satisfaction has gone up. So 20% improvement in efficiency and 25% in employment satisfaction. So that those are very important values to have here. So the message that's not that agile practices have not been there, or all we are talking about has not been there. The thoughts have been there, but as one of you rightly said earlier, things are being accelerated now, and it's kind of an opportunity to bring out or speed up these transformation at this stage. And because there's a very unique disruption that's going to go on for 6 months, 1 year, whatever. It's a perfect stage to start these kind of or accelerate these kind of good practices, breaking down silos or agile transformation or improving remote working, cost-based analytics, data being available, centralized data being available. So many good practices being thought about, some with a shorter time frame of implementation, some with a longer time frame of implementation. But it's the right time to start now and let it flow onto the long term so that we filter out the best practices. We'll talk more about sustainable efficiency if we catch up in the next session, and would like to hear more from you and your views about what more we can do. Is there any other shifts that we have not considered, and so on. Sorry, this is more of a speaking session.
Yeah, Sapna, when you are maybe now stop sharing, that we are seeing everybody attendees for the closing remarks. I'm amazed about all the findings and also the opportunities for airlines, even now being in that crisis. I thank you all for the great contribution. I hope you also like this specific format and concept of Virtual Ops 2020. The good news is that's just the third session. We will have till end of September plenty of more sessions. So the next session is already planned for next week. It's an airline pilots panel. That's also something maybe for Martin. Interestingly, we have 3 Martins in this call. So Martin from Latvia, maybe also something where you like to join. We will have our second aviation women's panel the 23rd of July. And then we have specific sessions which we will schedule very early for the Asia Pacific region, but also for the early birds. Here in Europe, you can then also join these sessions. And we will have a specific Africa session on the 25th of August. So all this is available on the Ops 2020 ibsplc.com website, where you also see the recordings from the sessions. So once again, big thank you. Let us rock the industry, digitize where digitization is useful and improve things, and looking forward to welcoming you in one of the upcoming sessions. And if you know somebody who's smart, positive, upbeat, and enthusiastic, please spread the word. So thank you very much and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, Gary.